Howdy, folks. Nosk here. So I know it's been a while since some major stuff went down, and this may seem a tad late to the party in retrospect, but to be perfectly honest, the underlying issues still exist, and are still continuing to be exacerbated on a weekly basis, if not a daily one. So I thought I might address some people today in the hopes of not only reaching out to them, but to also help them by clarifying and correcting some of the accusations and ideas that are currently floating around. For this particular video, I'll be addressing a group of people that I have been involved with for a significant amount of my life. This group is, to your surprise, or not, the furry fandom. Let me start off with this, however. I already know that this video will come off as maybe a bit biased, especially to one particular side of the issue, though I'm confident I'll probably still get flack from both ends of the spectrum no matter what. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started on the real issue. For a while now, there's been a distinct and growing splintering of the furry fandom, as it has in our society as a whole, along political and ideological lines. While many may inherently see this as a growing divide between the left and the right, I personally believe it's not inherently the case. In and of itself, I believe it is an aspect of the division, but not the primary consideration. The primary consideration, the main conflict and division, falls more strongly along the differences between authoritarian and libertarian values and positions. The overwhelming majority of the time, you'll hear from furries that the fandom is a place of love, enjoyment, acceptance, friendship, and open-mindedness. In the early years of the fandom, this may have been inherently true. However, in the last few years especially, this has been far from the case, and for many years I have actively argued about the direction the fandom was heading. This regular proclamation from furries on what the fandom is meant to be is often touted as if the fandom is a place that goes above and beyond the usual workings and aspects of normal society, as if into some manner place the fandom on some kind of moral and ideological pedestal. This is nonsense, of course. The furry fandom, like any fandom or group of its type, inherently reflects the societies in which they reside and exist. People of every ideology, sexuality, gender, perspective, opinion, and lifestyle will inevitably be represented to some manner or degree. However, in the last few years, I've felt the often touted sentiment of the fandom being far more considered and applied only towards those who fall into or agree with so-called progressive political perspectives. Particularly in the last couple of years, those in the fandom residing in more conservative, libertarian, right-wing in general, and even liberal political positions are more and more considered to be not real furries and or not representing the fandom. Feel free to insert your own air quotes. This change in the landscape of the furry fandom comes at the same time as the changing political landscape of the countries in which they are active at large. In particular is the continuing push of social justice, identity politics, as well as inherently Marxist ideologies in their attempts to co-opt the fandom as a whole, pushing to the wayside those of differing perspectives and opinions. Similar to our societies as a whole, we've also seen the significant rise of leftist furries supporting groups such as Antifa, endorsing and promoting their claims of being so-called anti-fascists. All the while, Antifa and those who support them continue to commit, endorse, and excuse violence and aggression towards those who disagree with their message and their actions. More and more often, we see people in the furry fandom supporting the idea of punching Nazis, and defending the idea that committing politically motivated violence, no platforming speakers and entertainers, as well as banning from events those who don't agree with their political perspective, as defending free speech and equality. In particular is one of the latest issues affecting the furry fandom, the cancellation of Rocky Mountain FurCon, also known as RMFC, which at least personally I believe was the result of an Antifa-supporting communist who goes by the name of Dio. But that's just me. Inherently, the issue came down to this. Dio consistently and actively advocating for people to physically assault those that they perceive to be quote-unquote Nazis, and when someone decided to make it clear to Dio and her supporters that they're someone who has a concealed carry permit and will, if necessary, take advantage of this right to defend themselves with a firearm if necessary, Dio and her cronies blew this entirely out of proportion and twisted it into a narrative that fascists were threatening to shoot them at the RMFC convention. As a result, either Dio or supporters of hers contacted the local authorities in Colorado, and so a massive security fee was placed on the convention that they couldn't afford, inevitably resulting in the convention having to close doors. A lot of personal information of RMFC leadership and their histories was also leaked and spread around during the issue, which had no bearing on the circumstances and was used strictly as personal attacks to further their own fabricated fear-mongering. Those accused of being fascist or Nazi sympathizers, such as the Furry Raiders and Foxler, have repeatedly denied such accusations, and no genuine evidence has been provided to support the claim that they are. The only so-called evidence we've been given is not more than accusations from Antifa-supporting ideologues and vague justifications based purely on trivial aesthetic attributes, such as the armband that Foxler wears and sells. I've personally interacted with the Furry Raiders and looked closely into the activities of Foxler and others. I've yet to encounter a single piece of evidence that any of these people are fascist or Nazi sympathizers. Inherently, the entire accusation falls completely flat, as it's the exact same kind of issue that so many people these days have to deal with. Being labeled a Nazi or a fascist, regardless of their actual political leanings, just because they happen to disagree with the progressive left and these Antifa supporters. Foxler and the Furry Raiders get labeled as Nazis by those who actively label anyone who disagrees with their political perspectives as ones, without any supporting evidence aside from the fact that they disagree with the narratives, as well as vague, trivial connections based on nothing aside from purely assumptions. Aside from RMFC, there was also the issue of Anthrocon pushing To The Ranting Griffin out of the convention by canceling his show, providing clearly senseless justifications, which any with even a semblance of functioning brain cells could see clearly as these political ideologues in control of the convention operations, forcing him out because of his supposedly offensive content. And due to this, To Griffin has made the decision to no longer attend the convention. As this country continues to see itself further divided along ideological lines, so is the fandom divided. The rise of social justice gave rise to the alt-right, both essentially being two sides of the same senseless identitarian coin. Both are inherently authoritarian, racially charged movements, the social justice left just having a head start, so obviously being quite a bit further down the rabbit hole. Inevitably, these movements infect the political and social spheres, feeding off of each other in a manner that pushes each side further into the radical extremes where they are so distinctly entrenched that they begin developing a very tribalistic if you aren't with me, then you're against me kind of mindset, to where friendships and relationships are strained or ruined, and they avoid those who disagree with their narratives to even the slightest degree. This serves only to relegate these people into ideological echo chambers, feeding back into the prior issue in a downward spiral, creating an entire group of fervent and radical ideologues. These groups can be distinctly found in the furry fandom, same as in society at large. You have your regressive left and your retrograde right. If you in any manner disagree with the narratives pushed by either side, you become labeled harshly. The left will call you alt-right, a fascist, a Nazi, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a transphobe, and all that kind of nonsense, and the right will do similar. And from either end of the spectrum, the careless use of derogatory and baseless labels are only ever used as a senseless justification for their own hatred and even violence in some cases. As we've seen recently with the politically motivated violence perpetrated by groups like Antifa on the left, who scream, yell, accuse anyone not in their ideological camp of being a fascist or a Nazi, they use these labels, all of them baseless, senseless, unsubstantiated, and couched in hatred, as excuses and justifications to harm and infringe on the rights and freedoms of others. At the current rate, it's simply a matter of time until the ideologues on the right begin to do the same. Invariably, this will translate into a reality within the furry fandom as well. Unfortunately, those of us caught in the middle of the two extremes get caught in the crossfire. Conservatives, liberals, centrists, libertarians, etc., all get attacked from either side. Hell, I've caught plenty of the flack myself. I'm a liberal, a left-wing centrist libertarian. I always have been. While my political positions may have altered slightly over the years, it's the ideological camp I've always been a part of. It's a part of my own position to take everything I can into consideration, every position, every idea, every argument, and make my own decisions which are determined by and necessitate the application of my liberal principles. Being generally on the left-wing end of the political spectrum, it's only natural that the majority of my detractors and accusers come from the quote-unquote progressive social justice left. I couldn't begin to tell you how many times I've been called racist, sexist, homophobic, despite the fact that I'm gay, transphobic, alt-right, Nazi, fascist, so on and so forth, simply by dint of having genuine and reasonable disagreements with their positions and narratives, and especially for refusing to entrench myself into intersectional identity politics. I've seen plenty of people who were once friends abandon that friendship simply by the fact that we don't agree. I've seen a lot of artists in the furry fandom take particularly harsh stances against the fans and commissioners who don't happen to also share their views. I've seen relationships ruined because one or both people involved end up falling into the camp of an ideological extreme one way or another. The recent issues of political differences infect and degrade the furry fandom and serve only to thoroughly ruin what the fandom once was. A space for anyone to be anything they want and be accepted for who they are. The furry fandom today is fractured and splintered by the plague of identitarian ideological extremes. The majority of us in the fandom are stuck in the middle somewhere, just trying to go about our business and enjoy our interests, all while being attacked, harassed, and despised by the extremes of the authoritarian aspects of both the left and the right. Just like with society as a whole, these ideological extremes and the radicals that inhabit them will only serve to hurt the fandom in both the short and the long term, as evidenced by the first casualties of RMFC, 2 Griffin, and the countless relations that have already been harmed or ruined. This is my address to the furry fandom as a whole. Worry not about your differences and disagreements. Find common ground with others, be they those you agree with or not. Set aside ideological concerns for the sake of actually getting to know people as individuals, and appreciate what you have in common, rather than that which separates us. Be better people. Be kind to both your allies and your enemies. Be what this fandom was meant to be. Accepting, understanding, open-minded. And encourage an atmosphere and space where any and all are welcome. This has been The Word from the Wolf.